CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney. Next couple of hours is the launch of Space Shuttle Columbia. The exact time not announced because it's carrying a secret military payload. Aside from that mission, correspondent Christopher Glenn at Cape Canaveral says the 5 astronauts will be checking out a spacecraft that hasn't flown in a while.
This will be Columbia's 8th flight, the first in a long time. Its last mission was just 2 weeks before the Challenger disaster, and it's spent a lot of the time since as a so-called hangar queen, sitting in the garage being plundered of parts to service other shuttles. But the flagship has also undergone about 250 major modifications to bring it up to the standards of the other orbiters. They include beefed-up brakes and steering and replacement of more than 3,000 heat shield tiles and about 5 miles of wiring. It's a state-of-the-art bird now, they say, and judging by the smoothness of the countdown so far, ready to get back in the launch rotation.
NASA won't make this morning's countdown public until it gets to the 9-minute mark. CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney. Columbia is sitting on the launch pad waiting for a liftoff expected sometime this morning. Correspondent Christopher Glenn is at the Cape. Chris, how do things look?
Well, minor problem, Bill. Fog. 7 miles visibility is required should there be some emergency after launch that would force Columbia to return to the Cape. But right now, from where we sit about 3 miles away, fog is obscuring the path. Now, they do expect it to burn off within the next hour and a half or so, and the shot could go earlier than that if it improves earlier.
And we don't know anything about the countdown because it's a secret military payload. What do we know about that payload?
Well, almost certainly, since this is a secret military flight, it's a spy satellite, and almost just as certainly it'll be deployed just a few hours after launch. The question is this time, what kind of spy satellite is it? It could be a cloud-piercing radar imager like the one it's believed Atlantis dropped off on another secret flight last December rather, and there's talk also that it might be some kind of advanced optical telescope device.
That's correspondent Christopher Glenn at Cape Canaveral.
Update. I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. As far as anyone can tell, given the secrecy surrounding this military mission, the countdown for Columbia's return to flight after 3.5 years is going smoothly. This morning's 4-hour launch window has just opened, but there could be a slight delay waiting for ground fog to burn off. But Air Force spokesman Colonel Ron Rand doesn't seem too concerned.
I don't think it's a bad situation. We're forecasting that there's going to be there could be some fog and haze in the launch area at around 7:30 when the period begins. It could be bad enough to reduce the visibility to 4 miles. We need 7 miles in order to have a launch. But we're also forecasting that if it does materialize, it will be gone by 8:30.
And that's just about an hour from now. Publicly, the countdown clock hasn't been started yet and won't be until just 9 minutes before the launch. And then we should see Columbia streak away toward the northeast, heading out on a trajectory that would enable the spy satellite everyone thinks the crew is going to deploy later today to cover 80% of the Soviet Union. 2-mission veteran astronaut Brewster Shaw heads the 5-man crew this time. All of them are military officers. We won't have any official word on the plans for landing until about 24 hours after launch, but it's believed they'll be coming down at Edwards Air Force Base in California on Sunday. Right now, the launch window is open, the sun is overhead, and we're waiting for it to burn off some ground fog, with blast-off of Columbia probable within the hour. Shuttle update at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News.
Fog delays the launch of Space Shuttle Columbia. Northern California is rattled by an early morning earthquake. There may be one quake-related death. Japan is about to get another new prime minister. Good morning, I'm Mike Pulsifer, and this is the CBS World News Roundup. A delay in today's scheduled launch of Space Shuttle Columbia. Christopher Glenn reports from the Kennedy Space Center.
Ground fog still lingers on Launch Pad 39B, but the sun is out and should take care of that shortly. Launch rules say 7 miles visibility is required. Right now, they've only got about 4. No telling where the countdown clock is. It won't start ticking officially until just 9 minutes before launch. This is the 30th shuttle flight, the 4th that's been shrouded in secrecy while the crew carries out military objectives. Some say the Soviets already know all there is to know about the Columbia payload, which is almost certainly a spy satellite. But Air Force spokesman Colonel Ron Rand defends the security.
We feel is that it's in the best interest of the U.S. government, because a lot of that is speculation, to do everything we can to keep the identity and mission of this payload as anonymous as possible.
About 3.5 hours left in the launch window this morning. Things should start to get hot around here as soon as the ground fog clears out. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
And the countdown to the launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia has begun at the Kennedy Space Center, and here now with an update is CNN's Tom Mangieri. Tom?
Well, Brian, it was weather that was the concern a little while ago. They only had about 4.5 miles visibility, but let's listen in now as the count is underway. This is the first flight of Columbia in a long time. It was originally launched back on April 12th of 1981, but it has been sitting in a hangar for some time, and they even called it the Hangar Queen.
Now ask Dick Richards to initiate the pre-starting procedure. Mission Control has transmitted the signal to start the onboard flight recorders. These are two recorders which will collect measurements of shuttle systems performance during the flight and will be removed and played back after the mission. At T-minus 5 minutes, the orbiter test conductor will ask pilot Dick Richards to start the auxiliary power units, which provides the hydraulic power for steering.
This will be the fourth all-military flight of the Space Shuttle program. The last one was December of 1988. Here you can see the shuttle landing facility. If they do have a problem in the first few minutes of flight, they can return to the launch site.
Stands now at T-minus 5 minutes and counting.
At 5 minutes now, the clock. CNN John Zarella joins us now from the Kennedy Space Center. John, I understand that you can now see a lot better and see the shuttle very quickly. The fog seemed to lift.
Well, a little bit, Tom. From here, you still can't make it out as well as we would like to. I don't think the launch is going to be as spectacular as most are, at least initially, until it clears that layer of fog that's over it. But again, it has cleared enough that the 5 miles minimum visibility that they're going to go ahead and get this bird off the ground. Tom?
They do need the 5 miles for launch, but don't they need some better weather for a return to the launch site, the landing strip there at the Kennedy Space Center?
They certainly do. They need about 7 miles visibility for that, and apparently they have that. If I look this way to where the landing site is, you can't see any fog at all over in that direction. Of course, on an RTLS abort, which takes about 30 minutes, they're going to need clear visibility to get that vehicle back down on the ground safely over at that landing site.
Throughout the morning, shuttle astronaut Mike Coates has been flying the shuttle training aircraft, taking a look at that 7-mile window that they need to come back to the Kennedy Space Center should that become necessary. A little while ago, they took the ride out to the launch pad. Actually, it was about 5 a.m. Eastern time. This is in the suit-up room, and you can see that the suits are much bulkier than the ones they used to use. Pre-Challenger, they use very lightweight flight suits, and they are all suited up. They've been in since 5 o'clock this morning. Let's go back now out to the Kennedy Space Center on the pad and see Columbia. Once again, all eyes will be wondering how well they have prepared this shuttle. They have taken the engines from other orbiters. They have retiled it. Now at 3 minutes in the countdown. They spent a lot of work. They started last November to refurbish the shuttle.
And the gaseous nitrogen of the main engines will be terminated. Liquid oxygen pressure now coming to flight level. The ground launch sequencer has started to retract the gaseous oxygen vent hood, or the beanie cap, on the external tank. The computers will make a final check to ensure that the vent arm is fully retracted at the T-minus 37 second point. T-minus 2 minutes, 20 seconds. Ground supplies of hydrogen and oxygen for the orbiter fuel cells have been turned off. Columbia is now running on its onboard reactants. The orbiter test conductor has asked pilot Dick Richards to clear the caution and warning memory system. He reports that clearing is completed, and he reported no expected errors. T-minus 2 minutes. The crew has just been told to close their visors on their launch and reentry helmets and to start the oxygen supply to their pressure suits. T-minus 1 minute 50 seconds. The liquid hydrogen replenishing of the external tank has stopped, and the tank is now being pressurized to flight level. The Space Shuttle is now isolated from all ground propellant and fluid loading equipment. T-minus 1 minute 30 seconds. We're less than a minute and a half away now from the launch of STS-28 and its crew of 5 astronauts. At T-minus 1 minute, the ground launch sequencer will verify that the shuttle main engines are ready to start. T-minus 1:15, the liquid hydrogen tank is now at flight pressure.
The seating, of course, Air Force Colonel Brewster Shaw and Navy Commander Dick Richards are sitting up in the front seats. This Columbia configuration is a 2-level configuration. Air Force Major Mark Brown, one of the space rookies, will sit alone on the lower deck of the split-level cabin and will trade seats with another astronaut for the descent when they come back in about 5 days.
Instrumentation recorders have gone into the record mode. The external tank heaters on the ET to orbiter attach fittings have been turned off. We've now had the handoff to the ground launch sequencer. We have a go for auto sequence start. The ground launch sequencer has handed off to Columbia, the shuttle now controlling. T-minus 20 seconds. T-minus 15 seconds. The SRB nozzle gimbal profile is now underway. T-minus 10. We have go for main engine start. 7, 6, go for main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff on Columbia and its return to flight.
This is Mission Control. Houston, roll program initiated. Good roll program confirmed for Columbia. 3 main engines up and running. Currently throttling down to 97% and throttling down now to 65% on the 3 main engines for the passage through maximum dynamic pressure. Altitude 18,000 feet, downrange about 1 nautical mile. Good throttles confirmed by the flight dynamics officer. Columbia has just been given the go at throttle up call by Mission Control. Altitude 62,000 feet. Downrange about 7 nautical miles. Three good APUs, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good main engines, current altitude 100,000 feet, downrange 13 nautical miles. Standing by for SRB separation. And we have SRB separation. Downrange 30 nautical miles now, 187,000 feet. Velocity is 4,300 feet per second. Minutes 40 seconds into the flight. Still have 3 good main engines running at 104%, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Our altitude 244,000 feet, downrange 51 nautical miles. And the 2-engine towel call has just gone up to Columbia. passing through 290,000 feet now, downrange 75 nautical miles. Flight Dynamics Officer reports we're tracking right down the middle of the pike on guidance and energy. 314,000 feet, downrange 90 nautical miles.
So Columbia is on its way after a long time sitting in the hangar, nearly 3.5 years. They did about 250 safety modifications in the post-Challenger era. They refurbished the entire vehicle. They put new heat tiles, the new lightweight version of the heat tiles underneath it, and reinforced some of the areas of the nose gear. They have this time taken some engines from some other vehicles and put it aboard Columbia for the flight, and so the tables have been turned for a change. The mission is a Department of Defense secret mission, the fourth that the NASA has carried so far. Here is some animation of just about what we would be seeing now if we were in front of the vehicle instead of behind it.
7,000 feet, downrange 154 nautical miles.
Columbia was NASA's original space shuttle. It was the one that made the first flight back in 1981, and many in the space agency now say that this launch and mission signifies a return to the space program at full throttle. The mission is a secret, but it's widely reported that they are carrying a spy reconnaissance satellite that will cover most of the globe, especially the Soviet Union and China, and that will help in what has been a long dry period for the intelligence gathering department. CNN's John Zarella is at the Kennedy Space Center. John, it looked like a beautiful launch despite some earlier problems with the weather.
Boy, it sure did. It was picture perfect once it got out of that fog bank, and it looked very reminiscent as far as its trajectory of the last Department of Defense secret mission. And the experts are with us. At least one of the experts is with us now, John Pike, a Federation of American Scientists. And John, you can tell by that trajectory, the direction in which the vehicle is going when it makes its turn, as to where it's going and what it might be carrying.
Right. The shuttle basically flies into two different trajectories. One straight due east when it's trying to maximize the amount of payload it can carry into orbit. In that case, the shuttle would have been moving off to the right of the launch pad. The other orbit, which reaches as far north as 57 degrees, about as far north as Moscow, is used when they're trying to maximize the area of the Earth's surface that they can cover. The fact that the shuttle is going off to that 57-degree orbit confirms that it does have one of these imaging intelligence payloads, the KH-12, on it.
Again, for those viewers that have just joined us, what has your sources, your intelligence been able to gather as to what's on board Columbia?
Well, putting together all the pieces, it looks like Columbia just launched with the first of a new generation of photographic reconnaissance satellites, popularly called the KH-12, that will be used for treaty verification, monitoring military troop movements, and looking at third world crises.
How sophisticated a satellite is this, and what exactly can it do?
Well, this satellite, which probably weighs about 28,000 pounds, is basically a large telescope with a television camera attached. It can detect objects as small as a few inches across, be able to see in the dark, and would be able to see a license plate, even though it might not be able to read the figures on the license plate.
And the speculation is that it is also carrying in its cargo bay a Star Wars experiment.
Well, it's reported that there's also a 275-pound small sensor test satellite on there that should be placed into space the day after the main payload's launch, that would be used to test Star Wars sensor technology.
John Pike, thank you very much. Well, Tom, that's about as accurate as we're going to be able to get as far as what the payload is on board Columbia. It's off and on its way, and I know you'll be following the mission the next several days. How long the mission may be, you'll be there. Tom?
All right. It is expected that sometime Sunday they will be returning, and we'll have more coverage right after these messages.
Power of information, WOAI 1200.
CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff on Columbia and its return to flight.
Space Shuttle Columbia, which hasn't flown since before the Challenger tragedy, lifted off from Cape Canaveral this morning with 5 astronauts in the cockpit and a secret military payload in the cargo bay. Correspondent Christopher Glenn is at the Cape. Chris, it looked like a perfect beginning.
Yeah, it certainly was, Bill. As a matter of fact, listening to the commentary from NASA, they described it as perfect. The only problems they had to report was when they handed over control of the mission from the Cape here over to the Johnson Space Center in Houston. They lost a little telemetry, but they got right back on the line. And they're well on their way now. They are in orbit. All the fire is out in the rockets, and we should get confirmation of their orbital insertion, coming up in about 20 minutes or so.
But from now on, we're not going to be hearing much from Columbia.
Not a lot at all. This is one of those secret military flights. It's believed they're carrying a spy satellite in the payload bay, which probably will be deployed a little bit later on today. But other than that, the Air Force wants secrecy. They bought the mission, and they're going to get it from NASA. As far as the folks over there are concerned at the Space Agency, they're not going to tell us anything.
That's Christopher Glenn at Cape Canaveral.
An Israeli military convoy is the target of a suicide bomber in South Lebanon. 100-mile-an-hour winds leave Las Vegas without power. The search continues in Ethiopia for a missing U.S. congressman. Good morning, I'm Mike Pulsifer, and this is the CBS World News Roundup. It continues its secret flight. Christopher Glenn reports from the Kennedy Space Center.
No news is good news as Columbia whirls into its second day in orbit. At least it means there aren't any serious problems aboard. The shroud of secrecy surrounding the military mission will be parted briefly a little while from now, when an announcement has been promised on what day the flight will end. That's expected to happen Sunday morning at Edwards Air Force Base in California. It's presumed the astronauts have already completed the major task of the mission, deployment of a sophisticated imaging satellite to spy on the Soviet Union. Now they'll turn their attention to a 275-pound package of instruments also reported to be on board, apparently related to the Star Wars missile defense program. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
3, 2, 1, mise à feu.
A European Ariane rocket lifting off with 2 satellites aboard. One is to track the positions of stars. The other will be used by West German television. In a train wreck in Mexico. Another DC-10 apparently suffers an in-flight engine explosion but lands safely in Denver. The search for a missing congressman continues in Ethiopia. Good morning, I'm Mike Pulsifer, and this is the CBS World News Roundup. As military mission goes into a third day, its secrecy is mostly intact. Christopher Glenn reports from the Kennedy Space Center.
Release of data pinpointing the shuttle's orbit by the U.S. Space Command last night indicates it is traveling along the ideal path for launching spy satellites, but Americans will never be told, in fact, that that's what the crew went into space to do. A high-ranking Soviet general seems to know all about it, though. He told the TASS news agency the new U.S. satellite will be able to take detailed pictures of his country, the Middle East, and China. It's believed now the crew has also been able to fire up a package of Star Wars-related instruments in the cargo bay, and they're expected tomorrow to put Columbia through its paces, flight testing many of the 258 modifications made since the Challenger disaster. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Officials say aircraft distress signals detected over Ethiopia yesterday were false alarms in the search for Congressman Mickey Leland. The government won't ground the DC-10. More violence in Beirut. Good morning, I'm Mike Pulsifer, and this is the CBS World News Roundup.
Trouble flares as Northern Ireland prepares to mark an anniversary. Disappointment deepens in the fruitless search for a missing congressman. Jim Wright's old House seat is up for grabs. Good morning, this is Frank Setapani with the CBS World News Roundup. Astronauts to get ready to come home. Christopher Glenn reports from Edwards Air Force Base.
Closeout day for the Columbia crew. The 5 military officers will be stowing gear, shutting down any remaining experiments, and testing the systems the shuttle will use for its swooping landing tomorrow morning, sometime between 6 and 9 a.m. Pacific time. The exact time is still classified information, like almost everything else about the secret military flight, but an official announcement has been promised for a short while from now. Best guess so far is 7:37 PST. There might have been a bit of gridlock on the dry lake bed runway here tomorrow. The B-2 stealth bomber was due to make a test flight today, but it had to be put off because of last-minute problems. Another attempt might have been made tomorrow, but that would have conflicted with Columbia's landing. The shuttle gets the nod in this case. The B-2 flight will have to wait at least until Monday. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
CBS News, I'm Betsy Rosenberg. Report for the next 12 hours, as CBS News correspondent Christopher Glenn reports from Edwards Air Force Base in California, a rocket is going up and Columbia is coming down.
Space doubleheader coming up on opposite sides of the country. At Cape Canaveral, an unmanned Delta rocket is scheduled to blast off in the wee hours, carrying a military navigation satellite. 7.5 hours later, Shuttle Columbia is due to land here in the California desert, 6:37 a.m. Pacific time, ending what appears to have been a very successful 5-day, 2-million-mile secret military mission, highlighted by deployment of an advanced spy satellite. The Sunday morning weather outlook is just about all you could ask, and all the ground support crews are ready. A missing ingredient found at most shuttle landings will be the crowds cheering the astronauts home. NASA's Nancy Lovato explained.
On DoD missions, the launch and landing are both closed to the public, so we won't be seeing any crowds.
Only the crew's families and a few special guests will be on hand. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
CBS News, this is Frank Sedapani. The United States Canaveral forced a delay in this morning's scheduled Delta rocket launch. The new date is next Friday at the earliest. When the rocket does go up, it'll deploy a military navigation satellite. Fine weather is expected for the California desert landing of the Space Shuttle Columbia. Christopher Glenn reports from Edwards Air Force Base.
Columbia's all zipped up and ready for the ride down. The braking rockets will be fired about a half hour from now out over the Indian Ocean to start the 5-man crew on its way, landing in about an hour and a half at this desert landing strip, and the weather couldn't be better. The military flight will end as it began, under a shroud of official secrecy. The public has been barred from the viewing area today. Only the astronauts' families and a few special guests will see the refurbished spacecraft dip to the dry lake bed runway for its first landing in 3.5 years. All's in readiness. We're waiting for the deorbit burn to begin. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at Edwards Air Force Base in California.
CBS News, I'm Dick Reeves. Company coming in for a landing from its classified spy satellite planting mission in space. Christopher Glenn is at the Edwards Air Force Base landing site.
The Space Shuttle Columbia is on its way down now. Less than a half hour ago, the big braking rockets were fired, and the ship is now plunging through the atmosphere, heating up from the friction of the air. Mission Control reported after a blackout period ended that the burn was successful and all the orbiter systems are looking good. The landing is due some 36 minutes or so from now. In weather conditions, it couldn't be more ideal, light winds and unlimited visibility, but no crowds on hand at the end of this secret 5-day flight, the chief business of which presumably was deployment of a satellite which will be used to spy on as much as 80% of the Soviet Union.
Christopher Glenn at Edwards. Christian.
CBS News, this is Frank Sedapani. The call came. Sonic booms heralded the Space Shuttle Columbia's arrival at Edwards Air Force Base less than half an hour ago. Christopher Glenn is there.
End of a very successful mission for the shuttle fleet's oldest orbiter. Columbia touched down on the hard-pan surface of the Rogers Dry Lake Bed runway about 25 minutes ago. Commander Brewster Shaw at the controls. It appeared to the eye that the shuttle had its nose up in the air for an unusually long time this morning. The rear gear touches first, and it usually takes just a few seconds for the nose gear to make contact. It seemed much longer today, but the sleek space machine rolled out to a stop right on the runway center line. NASA's commentator Brewster Shaw relayed Mission Control's congratulations to the crew.
Capcom Frank Culberson radioed Commander Brewster Shaw.
A super team and a great machine. Welcome home, Columbia.
Despite the military secrecy, which has blacked out almost all news of the mission, the traditional post-landing comments from the crew are expected several hours from now. Right now, they're still in the orbiter while the post-landing convoy of special vehicles makes sure all is ready for them to come out. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at Edwards Air Force Base, California.